Sometimes that mostly gets 4 to 13 or even a little bit older, but 5 to 12 is the range. When I have been in high trauma situations, oftentimes the adults, this is war trauma, this is complex trauma that people are living in. Children get overlooked in terms of their trauma response to what is happening around them. And many times the adults say, the children are doing fine. But I was in the DR Congo, and I'm watching the children, and they're actually all making guns out of everything and shooting each other and starting fires in the field. So I'm kind of thinking like, I don't know that they really understand that their children are being affected by this. But to me it was very clear, but because of their own trauma, they cannot look at the children and understand what's going on with them. So I was trained, I am a play therapist. So within my whole realm of working with children is that I believe that play is healing for children, and that play becomes an opportunity for children to share their stories. Actually, some say that play is a language of children. So in my mind, I'm thinking that how do I incorporate working with children utilizing some of the play therapy techniques that I have learned through the years and utilize. So when I'm working on this model, there's Michelle and Kelly have talked about there's psychosocial interventions, there's psychoeducational interventions for children, and there's psychoeducation that might be parent training, it might be training child workers to be trauma informed, and so those all things are legitimate. These things can be done on larger scale because you can do these in larger groups perhaps. They can be community-based programs. So I know these exist, and I've been in places and I've seen them, and they can be very effective. And then IJM, in terms of their research for the aftercare of survivors, has incorporated this model of trauma-focused CBT, which is it's a skill model that follows a certain procedure. It's evidence-based, it's well-researched, and it's working individually with a survivor of trauma. It's pretty labor-intensive because it might be like 8 to 12 sessions and involves the parents. It's great, it's comprehensive. Okay, so I'm looking at a spectrum here. So I know these things exist, and I know this exists. So then here's Tim coming into a situation where there are not professionally trained child therapy workers, and there's obviously a need in this community for some trauma work with the children. And so in a lot of places you'll find groups that will go in and they'll do a psychosocial intervention, and they'll do child safe places, they'll do art therapy, they'll go in and they'll provide support for like a large scale group, like a refugee population or a disaster relief a group of a lot of children. And then looking at this is more individualized based. That's pretty labor intensive for a therapist who's professionally trained to work there. So I saw a gap here. This is the gap that I've been working on. And I've been working on this the last 15 years. And it's been a really fun project for me. And I'm at a place now where I'm very satisfied with the model that I'm working with, and I'll explain that to you. And so I share you this context, again, because I want you to lay out for you, there's a place for us, in the systems out there to find a unique niche for what we might be able to do in working with children. I had to, for my reading for this, read The Many Faces of Exclusion, the Save the Children report, because I wanted you to again see clearly what's going on in the world out there. The two priorities, or the three priorities, are poverty. So again, it's violence to the poor. It's I think it's armed conflict is the second threat, and the third threat is discrimination against girls. So those are the three threats that they've identified for children And so wanted you to kind of get an overview that, we have these populations out there, large populations. I also, in my title, I put the words in a chronic complex context. And so my work that I've been doing, I'm working in places where it's chronic, meaning that there may be no end in sight. It's complex in the sense that oftentimes the trauma is happening within a family system or within a community, and there's no escape. So that's why I use those two terms together, chronic, complex, context. So let me take you through real quickly some slides and what brought me, how I worked through this training. But first of all, these are the questions that I felt like I want to answer with this model. First of all, does the model generalize to the spectrum of trauma events encountered by children aged 5 to 12, from one event trauma to chronic complex trauma? So I want a model that I could use in a major disaster situation, but also one that could be used in places where there's chronic complex trauma. Is the model sustainable in the local context? It is incredibly, incredibly important. Is it meaning that I do not want it dependent on me financially or in terms of, heard this from Pat, it's like it has to be sustainable in the local context. It has to be their movement, it has to be done contextually, it has to be done organically. How do I go in there and allow that to happen and then move away? Thirdly, does the model work across cultures? And I've learned that the things that I might be teaching the adults in working with children, they might be countercultural because men do not sit on a mat with children and say to the child, here's a bag of toys, you may do whatever you wish. So that may be countercultural for them to do, but it still is okay culturally, when they can see the benefit of them sitting on a mat with a child. And when they get beyond their barriers that says, as an adult male, I don't sit on the mat with a child. Thirdly, does the model represent a theory of change which gives children an opportunity to process their trauma stories? That's ultimately my goal, is there a way for them verbally or non-verbally, and with a younger set, it's going to be non-verbal through the play materials, for them to process their trauma stories? And lastly, does the model encourage those who are trained to address their own trauma stories? I get a double benefit. If I'm training adults in the community to deal with children of trauma, almost always those adults are doing their own trauma work simultaneously as I'm helping the children, as I'm helping teach them how to deal with the children themselves. Many comments at the end of the training are, I thought I came here to help children. What happened here is that I received more help than I was giving the children. And I hear that and I smile and I'm thinking, yes, because their ability to work with children is going to be, totally contingent on them being able to do their own trauma work. But I do not frame it in such a way of saying, you are here to do your own trauma work. You are here because you love children and you want to know how to help children with trauma. And it works. It totally works. So I get a double benefit. So those are the questions that I have followed with developing this model. So I'm going to take you through quick history. So this is Tsunami 2004, and there's been reference to that. And this was actually one of the entry points where I started working. I like this one because it shows the two circles of the waves and how that wave really, how it came in and hit this part of Thailand, but went all the way across to Sri Lanka and India, and how massive the disaster was there. This was my first exposure. Bill and Leanne were also living in Chiang Mai, and so we were living in Thailand at the time, so that gave me opportunity when we were called in to help, but then specifically, how can we help the children? So this is Banda Aceh. I was actually training some young adults on some basic trauma-informed care. This would have been much more of a psychosocial approach. And I show this picture because it shows me intently listening to a language or to having no idea what's being said. I also, this is one of those pivotal moments in my history because
when we talked to the man in the middle, the questions were, family members, who's left in your family for you to connect to? He said, every one of my family members, my wife's family, extended family, they're all dead. I never heard a response like that before. Secondly, what about your house where you live? It's gone. What about your business? Everything's gone. And I remember feeling this sense of like, oh, I've never sat with someone before who didn't have something to attach and connect to. What do we do? And I remember one of the things that I had learned was what we can do then is we give them the gift of our presence. And I've used that phrase, a gift of our presence, as a healing presence. And that transcends, any language, any ability to give specific problem solving to what they need to do in their life. And so this brought me to my knees in terms of like, okay, what I've been teaching and preaching about the gift of presence, this is it right now. There's nothing we can do for this guy right now to give him a sense of what to hold on to. So I show that to you because that was a pivotal moment for me in my training. This is just showing more of a psychosocial approach of having whole areas of kids in the refugee camps and then giving them one pencil to draw with and people going around just talking to the children about, tell me about your picture. So this was one of those big, large-scale psychosocial. But it was good to be part of that. I learned a lot. And then this was Banda Aceh, as you can see by the dress there. And this is actually a nice drawing to look at because it really depicts the tsunami very, very well. All those lines are the waves. You can see the people in the waves. You can see the destruction in this picture. So then, beyond the immediate response in the southern part of Thailand that got hit, I got contacted by somebody if we come in and specifically help develop a children's response to that region. And it was called the SIDEC Caravan Project. And what was going on here was that in Thailand, there's a very large extended royal family. And I didn't know this, but the royal family speaks their own language. So if you're with someone in the royal family and you go out to the airport and they speak to the airport agent, all of a sudden everybody stops, and all of a sudden you're with royalty. Well, I didn't know that the woman that we were working with, because she was so down to earth, she was part of this royalty. So she got us into places, and what she did is that we decided that we're gonna set up some mobile caravans, equip them with play therapy, and we're going to equip people to go out to the different areas and teach them how doing some of the basic play therapy techniques. So this is, again, starting this process of like, how do we incorporate a play therapy model? So that's 2004, 2005. Meanwhile, we're living on the border with Burma, and this is back like in 2006, 2007. There's conflict in the Karen state. They were at peace a bit in the Shan state up there, but this border, Chiang Mai is about here. These are the areas bordering on Thailand there, and there's active war going on. And so I got asked by a group to go in and do some response in the war zones. So this was another time where I was kind of pushed to my like, okay, what do we do? How do I make a difference here? The picture here you can't see very well, but they're basically, the Burmese military would come into the Karen or Karenni area, they would burn the villages down, leave landmines, and the people would have to go live and set up a kind of their own little makeshift village in the jungle, and then they kind of get settled in. The Burmese military find them again, they would burn them out, and there were families that were moving like this, 5 and 6 times, and obviously losing family members in the process. So I got asked to come in, and this was actually in the Shan state, and again, I did more of a psychosocial training. And the guys that you see, what was interesting here is that they were actually having more fun, the young adults, with the play toys than they were like monopolizing the toys themselves, because it's like they've never worked with clay before, and they were not working well and seeing that the children needed this because they were enjoying the play themselves. But here I was trying to get them to work individually with the child. So again, these are all of the early stages of me trying to figure out, like, how do I incorporate a play therapy model in these settings? So, I'm thankful for living in Thailand at the time that I had exposure to this big disaster and being part of a relief effort and bringing in some healing for children, and then also working across border into Burma. And I show this one because this group is the first group that I actually did much more of a concentrated training with them. I spent about 5 days with them. I'm the only white person there, and they were women's workers, teachers, children's workers, medics. And it was the first time I put together like a 5-day training program. And what I learned from them is you have to do a lot of experiential learning, a lot of role plays. I create scenarios. We'd role play out the different scenarios. And I learned in this group, it's like they're not gonna learn from sitting at their little table and writing everything down. They're gonna learn through experiencing this. And when I went in with this group, I had the sense like, Tim, you readily attach to the people that you train. And then you have to go through this withdrawal of, after you've attached to them, you have to say goodbye and maybe never see them again and send them off. Some of these people had to walk 10 days to get to the training. Some of them had to hide at a road because the Burmese would monitor anything crossing the road, and they'd have to sit there in the ditch for sometimes 2 days before there was an opening for them to get across the road. So they were coming under extreme circumstances to come for something. And I just said, there was something, he says, you just let yourself get too attached to these people. But the reality is, when I have this picture, we were in this wonderful, beautiful jungle valley. I was still in the training center where we were at, and I'm watching all of them go through this path across the valley, winding up, and just all of these, this beautiful sight of them waving back, and they were just so happy. I'm going, I let myself get attached to them. It's like, and I just kind of gave in and said, okay, when you spend this kind of time with people, you're going to get attached to them. Just do it, But I had that sense of trying to prevent. I think it was something in me that realized that, you give a lot when you're living with people in these circumstances for these number of days. And, part of it was trying to guard my heart, but in the end it was like, I can't do that. I have to let myself get attached. So then, now moving into the Congo. And so this was actually a transition into finally doing more of my first official training. And I don't know, Stan, if you worked up this in the Turi district up there. Did you work in the state up there? That's Bunia bordering. So I had a contact, and he's actually the SLI guy in that region of Bunia. We had a mutual friend, and he said, please come in and do a training. And so I actually then set up a 10-day training where I did 5 days type classroom, and then 5 days what I call healing camp. And Bunia was the big city there, but we went up to the village called Bogoro that he had ties with, and in 2003 they had a terrible massacre, and we're still feeling the effects of that massacre up there in Bogoro. And that's where he chose to do the training. And he invited, I didn't know this, but he invited people from different tribes that actually kill each other to come to the training. And I think he saw it as a way of kind of bringing a group of people together and hopefully finding a peaceful state. And that was also interesting to have that mixed in with the training. So this was my first effort at doing training. And what I learned is that in my training, there's a 5-day program that I explained to you already, which we covered topics like what does trauma look like in children, how does the brain respond to trauma, what are the triggers for people reacting to trauma, and then specifically how do we do a trauma response through this play therapy modality with children. So we're spending 5 days on that. And then the second 5 days is what I'm now calling healing camp. So if I have 20 participants up here, we invite 40 children here so that every participant has 2 children that they're working with individually through the course of those 5 days. So this is all till 5 days. And for Healing Camp, I have 3 components. There's a community program, and I teach them, I call it Big Circle Time. And so the whole goal here is not competition. The whole goal here is that, Lynette's smiling because Lynette's seen one of these trainings in Zimbabwe. I've been part of one. The Big Circle Time is everybody has to participate. We are one community. Children from age 4 through all the adults. And what they're doing are activities that are building community. Some of it might be song and dance. Some of it might be a little bit game-oriented, but never in competition where the little kids lose out and the big kids win. Plus, I always state that all the adults have to participate. You're part of the community. And then the second part is what I call the family circle time. So these 40 children are divided into 5 family groups. And they're given a cap or something to identify what color group they are in. So every child, you'll see pictures of that, not here yet, because I don't have the caps here. Wait a second. But the children, if they're in the yellow group, they all have yellow caps, and the adults all have a yellow bag like this. This is their play therapy kit. So then the children all know where they belong. Everybody knows where they belong during the course of the healing camp. Every day of the healing camp is about 4 to 5 hours, and it runs a very, very tight schedule. And Big Circle Time is giving every child a sense of belonging to a family unit. So if I have 20 participants, 40 children, then there's 4 adults assigned to each family group. And that's their time where they meet every day, and it's also the time that they do 2 stories. And in the context where we can do Bible stories, they do a Bible story with a theme that's related to trauma events, and then they also do what I call a real life story. So whatever the theme is of the Bible story, they have to generate a real life story that could happen in the lives of these children. So in their family group is where they get the stories. And then the children every day rotate through the 5 family groups, so they hear 5 different stories, 1 from each group. Make sense? Okay, and then the third part of this is what I call healing play. And this is the system where 2 children are assigned to each adult, and for 20 minutes each of those 5 days, they have an individual play therapy session, and I call that healing play. Again, the structure is very, very structured. Over and over I say structure means safety. So they hear the same things over and over. Just to let you know, healing play always begins with, here's my bag of toys that I'm going to allow you to use, and I open it up and I hand it over and I say, you may do whatever you wish with this. If there's something I do not want you to do, I will let you know. They hear that same direction every day. It's scripted. It comes from, filial therapy. Who knows filial therapy? The Guernseys. I adapted a lot of their structured play that they teach parents because of very simple view of working with children. So then the child has the freedom now to do whatever they wish with this bag of toys. And in this, I'll have art supplies. I'll have some variation of plastic animals, and then if I can, I have this model magic, which is really wonderful clay that can be used over and over again, and they keep it in a sealed pack. So, just have a few minutes. I'm going to run through the rest of the story. That's the structure. This is Agamba. He's my translator, trauma coordinator in the Congo. He sends me pictures that things have been getting quite desperate. He sent me this picture and told me the story of this little boy that he's trying to work with. This is all in the Congo area there. So then moving on, so at this point I have the program into a place where I can utilize it in different settings. This is Nigeria. This is showing where the greatest persecution towards Christians has happened by Boko Haram. And what happens here is I work with Open Doors. Open Doors brings me to Jos, and they bring in people from this whole region, the north and the northeast of Nigeria, and I've done that for 4 years, training them in this model. And so at this point last year, we trained 10 people out of that group of about 120 who now are at the next level of becoming trainers in their communities. So that's Nigeria. If I had time, I'd play this for you. This just shows the African way of building community. These are the women and men I'm training. This is some of my cohort of group that I'm training real closely up there in Nigeria. I want to show you this, and just so you can get a sense. This is Easty. He's young. He really understands this. He's doing a story here. And basically he's doing a story where there are no materials, and he's using seed pods and sticks to do his story. And I just want to see if I can play his introduction here.
Tell you a story. And a story is a gift from the storyteller. I want you to listen carefully with your ears, and also make sure that your eyes are on you. You're watching. And don't forget to also listen with your heart. Are you together, children?
Yes.
Once upon a
So what you just heard from him is the script for how they start every story with the children, whether it's a Bible story. And then there's specific words if they're telling a parable of Jesus that they use for the script in telling that story. But I love this because he's role-playing here with his peers. But he just picked up the pod seed, and then he goes on and says, this is Pastor so-and-so, and holds up a stick, and plays out, just impromptu this whole story using nothing but the prompt sitting in front of him. Just showing the healing play. And if we had time, this little girl is really quite talkative during her healing play, just in English, talking about what's happening with these figures, and she's playing out.
We have a 15-minute break. We can make it 10 minutes. If you want to go to 3:05, I don't want you to feel too rushed. I think everyone can get coffee fast. I trust these people.
So just,
So the son asked for forgiveness, his father forgave him. So his father called his servants now.
Father called his mother.
His servants catch the fattest animals among the animals and cut it for him, so that they will celebrate. So let them bring clothes and sandals, so that they will come and wear it for the boy. So, and they cut it, so now they are celebrating.
I know you can't fully understand what she's saying, but you see how, right now she's totally playing out the world, and the person she's with is allowing this to take place without interrupting. Let me move on. I show this one because the last day they're spending with the children, each of the adults takes the 2 children that they were working with and will take them and bless them and pray with them. This is actually showing when the family group's praying for the children in their group. So we really have a specific closing time that blesses the children and brings it to a closure for them. So then moving on to Kenya, I worked with Open Doors here also. You can see one of the bags there that's decorated. And where I've done training is down here now near Lamu and Garissa. What you don't see is Somalia's over here. So this is the area of Kenya that they basically want to be a Muslim state. So, and if you remember Garissa in your history, that's where there was quite a massacre of the Christians in that one college. So basically I've gone into these places to do trainings. Here's the group in Garissa with the children and the adults. Again, now you're seeing their caps. The caps are really, really important because it gives them a sense of belonging to which family they are part of. And it means a lot, for them to know which of those adults, aunties and uncles, those are like my surrogate parents that I've never had before. This is showing, actually we did this training, this is advanced training in Nairobi, and we brought in some of the children. Florence here is my trauma coordinator there. And then that's Peter, he's a teacher who does a great job with the children. Carol is actually a psychologist, and I'm trying to figure out how to make her an associate to the program. Now this is showing a connection. There's Florence and me, and then to the right is Regina. Regina is from Zimbabwe, and Lynette is friends with Regina and has done a training with Regina. But I brought Regina in so that she could help me with this advanced training, and we could have some cross connection, because in 2018, Regina did 4 trainings and has trained 100 people in Zimbabwe, and she's just snowballing in terms of the need and what is happening in her region of Zambia, Mozambique, and in Zimbabwe. And so bringing Regina in was a way, to share this. And now here we're in Zimbabwe when I did the first training there. There's Regina working with some of the adults. They're probably accepting their art therapy bags, and here's the big circle time. Everybody's in there, everybody's participating. Here's a math story time, and I don't know if you can read it. It says, "Thank you for."
Bring us to your camp.
I can read it here.
Bring us to your camp.
"Thank you for bringing us to your camp. I love you." That didn't show you that, but this is a whiteboard little paddle that they can use, and so they can draw on that and then erase off. So then, new experiences. Last year, got invited into Mongolia. We were in May, and the picture on the right is where we held the camp, and it was actually snowing. So that was a new experience to think about doing this in the snow. What we did there is that for the first 5 days, our host there, she's focused on the family in Mongolia, and she invited me in, and she invited both Christian and non-Christian organizations for the 5-day training, and then chose about 15 of those to do a healing camp with the children. Interestingly here, I had to modify because in Mongolia you're not allowed to bring in Christian, biblical reference to training. So I had to take all of that out and figure out, what are the core issues here. This is the group that I trained there, and then see if I can hear a little here. She's doing her story. How attentive the kids are, how the math story brings them right into the story because it's at their level. And you see here how the adults who are part of this are totally with them. The adults don't get to go stand off and drink coffee. They're totally part of the family system and the community system. Then, most recently, as in Kurdish part of Iraq in Tabuk, and the woman on the right is a traditional, she's dressed in the traditional Yazidi. And then you can't see this real well, but we visited in the refugee camp. This woman with her 6 kids, she lived in the tent. In the tent, I couldn't believe how clean it was, and she had a whole sewing operation going on in the tent. I mean, her resilience and the way that she handled her children, the way she dressed her children, it's like I couldn't imagine an American family knowing how to do this in a refugee camp. But I was just astounded to her resilience of having these 6 kids, having lost her husband, running a whole sewing operation, sending her kids to the camp, and us coming in to visit her and welcoming us into her tent. This is me doing the training with Zirak, who is the coordinator there. And just show you a little here. Again, I think we have he's doing a story here. And so you notice language-wise, they're doing the stories in the language of the children. showing the kids. After every story, they're asked to do a response to the story, which means that they can draw or write something, and then they're given the option to share their response. No one has to share the response, and when they're done with the response, you just basically say, thank you for sharing. You don't make a whole lot of application. You don't go on and expand on what the child's response was. You want it to be left with them. So I'm going to finish off now, but what I learned in this model here is that that I can make this sustainable by going in and training people. They may have low skill level to be able to do this, but they have a heart for children. And I make it their program so that the sustainability is they're going to have to figure out how to continue the movement. Like Regina in Zimbabwe, I mean, she's taken it on now to a whole nother level. So some say, people would say, you had a nice experience for these children for 5 days. What they don't understand is the experience that they had those 5 days was incredibly healing for them, whether it was in the healing play, whether it was being part of a community, whether it was belonging to a family system, these family groups that I talk about. And those 5 days are incredibly meaningful for these children. Up in Nigeria, we went back a second time to the same location to do a training, and all the children had been trained a year before, were flocking to come to where we were doing the training, totally remembering who they worked with, and totally wanting to connect right away. So, that was a whole year for children very young. I know this leaves an impression in the lives of children. So, I wanted to share this with you because, again, it was knowing that we have some systems out there that can help children, but I was looking for a way to scale this up, but also give specialized attention to an individual child. And I think that's at the core of my model that I believe is important, that every child has their trauma story to share. We have to give them an opportunity to do that in a safe, user-friendly way where the child knows that this adult is basically there now to hear their story.
Tim, is there any ongoing relationship with these families, and especially with the parent figures, and they build this relationship for the 5 days? Do they continue at all?
We work through if they're part of a church, we're going to work through the church. So like in Nigeria, the pastor chose the children to come in for those 40 children. So then the trauma coordinator, not me, the people on site, then they're going and giving feedback to the pastor, who's then going to deal with his church. And there were some times where we weren't sure about issues of abuse, and so then we had to think through how are we going to bring this to the attention of the pastor? How do we bring this in a discreet way to make that known without the child's safety being in danger? So there were situations, but there had to be that local system there. And it's either a church or like here in Kurdistan region, Zurich is running a place called the Haven Center. And so he would be my contact, and they're working in the refugee camp.
Okay, we may follow up with these kids.
Right.
Okay.
The Haven Center one in DeHook is wonderful because they have tens of thousands of kids to work with. They choose 50 kids and work with them for 3 months in a coordinated program. I came in, and the training I did gave them kind of a new vision of how to actually work with the children. And so the system's already set up there that they're working with the families in the camps of these children. That's all part of their program. So I'm always looking for these systems where it's connected to something. It's not just in isolation. And I don't want to go into places where it's isolated and there's not a connecting point.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Oh, question.
Yeah, I guess, you said that the pastors in some contexts are selecting the children, and do you have a specific criteria for persons to participate?
Yes, we send that out, and I think I'm gonna share more in depth about it in the special interest, or whatever, the interest groups. If you go into the child trauma, I have a handout that gives a bunch of information about how I do that, actually structure it. But I wanted, mainly here, my goal is to see, was looking for something between these two ends of the spectrum in terms of how we're offering services to children and believing in that every child has a story to share and the dignity that that child has can actually share a story. Let me just finish with one thing. One of the women in Nigeria, a wonderful woman, really friendly to children. She had a 4-year-old, Viviana, and after the first day she says, Viviana wouldn't talk. Viviana wouldn't play with anything. And she felt like her job was to make Viviana play with the toys. And I said, it's okay. First day may not happen. Second day, Victoria was the woman's name. Victoria says, Viviana didn't do anything again today. Well, how do I make her do something? I said, you don't need to make her do anything. And she's still like, but I'm failing because I'm not getting this child to tell her story. But I'm watching this happen. The third day, I walk by, and I have to be very discreet when they're sitting out there in their mats. I don't want to disrupt or distract. Viviana is sitting next to Victoria, totally hugging her hip, all snuggled into Victoria. And that day, Victoria says, Viviana still didn't do anything. I said, yes, she did. She was finding an emotional attachment with you because you're a safe mama to her, and she may not get that at home. For day 4 and day 5, that's exactly what Viviana did every day. And so I had to convince Victoria that she was successful. Even though Viviana didn't look at anything in the bag, didn't even talk during that whole time. But I went by every day and I watched Viviana, and she was in her glory, snuggled into Victoria. And I decided, I said to Victoria, you were successful. And it was a really, really interesting example to see what was healing for Viviana.
Maybe to hear other stories. So we are at 11 after. Our next session starts at 1/4 after. I'm going to be very generous and give you until 16 after. And we have coffee and hummus right outside the door. Grab it, run to the restroom, and come on back. So we're cheating you out of breaks because it's just a full day.